Well, folks, it's been, how can I put it? A pretty rough week for Liverpool, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no getting around that.
Exiting the Champions League is one thing, but then to lose the Carabao Cup Final to Newcastle just yesterday.
It's a tough pill to swallow, for sure.
It really is. I mean, just 24 hours on from that final whistle at Wembley, the reaction has been, well, intense, to say the least. Everywhere you look, online, in the pubs, it's all anyone's talking about.
It's that classic football roller coaster we see so often, isn't it?
Yeah, tell me about it.
One minute you're on top of the world talking trophies and glory, and the next year, well, you're dealing with this kind of crushing disappointment, and it seems to breed some, let's just say, very strong opinions.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we're here today. We're going to try and dig a little deeper, look past the immediate frustration, and try to understand what this week really means for Liverpool moving forward.
Yeah, where do they go from here?
Exactly. You've been poring over all the details, the analysis, and, well, we want to get your expert take on the bigger picture. So let's dive right in, shall we? What are the key takeaways here as we try to make sense of it all?
All right, well, first things first. I think we need to address the elephant in the room, right?
Was the word.
Yeah, exactly. The crisis talk, it's been everywhere since yesterday, hasn't it? Two big losses in quick succession, and suddenly for some people, the sky is falling. It's all doom and gloom.
Yeah, but let's not forget the context here, right?
Right.
It wasn't that long ago that the narrative surrounding Liverpool was completely different. It was all sunshine and rainbows. I mean, we were talking about Salah as a potential Ballon d'Or winner. The team was being tipped as a genuine title contender. It's quite a stark contrast to what we're seeing and hearing now. What do you make of that rapid shift in perception?
Honestly, I think it just highlights how emotionally charged football can be, not just for the fans, but for the media too,
For
right?
sure.
It's all about extremes. You're either riding the crest of a wave or you're down in the dumps. There's very little middle ground. But the truth, as is so often the case, probably lies somewhere in between, wouldn't you say?
No doubt. Nuance can be a hard thing to find in the world of football these days.
It really can.
All right, so let's get into the specifics. Starting with that Carabao Cup final defeat against Newcastle.
Yeah, let's break that down.
Losing any final is tough, but this one seemed to sting a little bit more for some fans. One of the biggest talking points, of course, has been Klopp's decision to start Keller in goal. Keeping with that tradition of having a designated cup goalkeeper. What are your thoughts on that decision, especially in the context of this particular game?
Well, it's a tradition that's based on, rewarding players who have contributed throughout the cup run, giving them that moment in the spotlight. And Keller has been excellent in those earlier rounds.
He has. He has.
But on the other hand, you have to look at the opposition. And Newcastle, as they've shown all season, are a very, very tough nut to crack. They're playing with a lot of confidence, a lot of intensity. They're essentially the fourth best team in the league right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the question has to be asked, didn't it?
It does.
Did starting Kelleher instead of Allison, who's obviously got that big game experience, weaken Liverpool's chances? Was it a risk that perhaps didn't pay off?
It's certainly a question worth considering. I mean, there's no denying that Allison brings a level of authority, of composure, maybe even intimidation. That's hard to match.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I think it's important to be careful about, turning this into a blame game.
Right, making him the scapegoat.
Exactly. Newcastle played incredibly well. And to say that one decision, one player was the sole reason for Liverpool's defeat, I think that would be a massive oversimplification.
It would.
There were other factors at play, for sure.
All right, well, let's move on then to the Champions League exit.
Go.
Another disappointing result, to say the least. And it's especially tough to swallow when you remember how dominant Liverpool were in the group stage.
They cruised through that group, didn't they?
They really did. Top of the group, some really impressive performances. Not even some of the so-called super clubs managed to do that. So to then go out in the round of 16, it just feels, I don't know, kind of anticlimactic, doesn't it?
It does. It raises questions, for sure. And it makes you wonder about the psychological impact,
Oh, absolutely.
How does a Champions League exit, even for a team that's doing well domestically, affect the players mentally? I mean, we've seen it before with other big clubs. They might be dominating their league, but then they have a setback in Europe and it seems to linger. It affects their confidence, their form, even if it's just for a short period.
It's the prestige of the competition, isn't it?
It is. It's that sense of, of being among the elite, of competing for the biggest prize in club football. And when you fall short, it can be tough to shake off.
No doubt. But having said all that, We then have to look at the bigger picture, right? And specifically the Premier League.
right?
Because objectively speaking, Liverpool are still in a very strong position.
They are.
They've been top of the table for a good chunk of the season, and they've only lost one league game. So can we really talk about a crisis when a team is, well, when they're on course to potentially win the title? Doesn't that seem a bit, I don't know, a bit over the top?
It does seem a bit contradictory, doesn't it? I mean, the
Mm.
emotional response to these two defeats is understandable, of course. These are huge competitions. But to label it a crisis, I think that ignores the incredible consistency they've shown in the league. And let's not forget, the league title was always the main priority this season. So yeah, I think perspective is important here.
It is. And it's easy to lose sight of that when you're caught up in the heat of the moment, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay, well, another thing that always seems to happen when a team has a couple of bad results is the scrutiny on individual players.
Yeah, the microscope comes out.
And nobody seems to be under that microscope more than Mo Salah right now. Do you think that's fair? I mean, yes, he hasn't been at his best lately, but is it really all his fault?
Well, look, it's natural for the spotlight to fall on your star players, right?
Sure.
Especially when things aren't going so well. But I think it's important to remember that football is a team sport. And if you look closely, you see that Salah isn't the only one who's maybe been a bit off the boil recently. I mean, Diaz has had a few quiet games.
Yeah.
Jota's not quite firing on all cylinders. Shabasla is still finding his feet in the Premier League. It's not just about Salah.
And that's a crucial point, isn't it? Because if those other attacking players were consistently performing at their best, it would take some of the pressure off Salah, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. If you have multiple threats in attack, it makes it so much harder for opponents to defend. They can't just focus all their energy on stopping one player.
Because at the end of the day, Salah is still one of the best players in the league.
Oh, without a doubt.
Maybe even the world. He's consistently delivering goals, assists. So to focus solely on a couple of quieter games, I think that's a bit unfair, wouldn't you say?
I would. And you also have to consider the tactical side of things. Opposing managers are going to spend hours and hours devising ways to stop Salah. That's just a given.
It's the price you pay for being that good, I guess.
It is. And that's why it's even more important for the other attacking players to step up, to contribute, to share that burden.
Okay, so zooming out a little bit, what about the overall team dynamics? Especially in that Newcastle game. It felt like maybe there was a bit of a hangover from that Champions League exit, maybe a bit of complacency against a very good Newcastle side.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. That Champions League disappointment can take its toll, both physically and mentally.
It can.
And to Newcastle's credit, they were fantastic. They played with a real hunger, a real intensity, and their game plan worked to perfection.
No doubt about it. All right, so looking ahead now to the summer and beyond, do you think these recent setbacks will have any significant impact on the club's long-term plans? The transfer window is coming up. Do you think these results will force their hand?
Honestly, I don't think so. Not in any major way.
Okay.
I mean, sure, these defeats are disappointing, but they don't change the overall direction of the club. The focus will still be on maintaining a competitive squad, identifying areas for improvement, and making smart decisions in the transfer market, especially with some key players approaching the end of their contracts.
Yeah, there's always that challenge, isn't there?
There is.
Keeping hold of your best players
Yeah.
while also trying to strengthen the squad.
Right.
Finding those players who can come in and make a real difference. It's a tough balancing act.
It is, but that's the job, isn't it? To constantly evolve, to stay ahead of the curve. And if Liverpool do end up winning the league this season, well, that pressure will only intensify next year. They'll be the defending champions. Everyone will be gunning for them.
They will. But let's not forget, this has still been a very successful first season for the new manager.
It has. A lot of positives to take away.
All right, so to wrap things up, what's the main takeaway from this whole week for you? What should Liverpool fans be thinking about as they look ahead?
I think the most important thing is to keep things in perspective. Yes, this week has been tough. The defeats hurt. But the bigger picture is still very positive, especially in the league.
Absolutely. This talk of a crisis, I think, is a massive overreaction.
I agree. And, winning the Premier League is a huge accomplishment. It's something to be incredibly proud of, especially when you consider the dominance of certain other teams in recent years.
No doubt. So yeah, while the disappointment is understandable, I think the real question now isn't about whether Liverpool are in crisis. It's about how they respond to this adversity. How do they use this experience to fuel their determination in the remaining games of the season? And how do they build on the progress they've made both on and off the pitch in the years to come?
Great questions.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. But as always, we want to thank you for listening, for engaging with the show, and for being a part of this growing community. We really appreciate your support. Until next time.